With the double angle formulas, we now have another tool to help us prove our identities. So let's just look at one of those. Let's take a look at number 34 on page 595. It asks you to prove the identity given. So here's what we see. Sine of t minus cosine of t, all that's squared. They want us to prove that it's equal to 1 minus sine of 2t. Now remember, with these proofs, you can either work on one side and make it match another, or you can work on both sides if you want to. I tend to look at them and see if there's any algebra I can do, and so since the left side has a square on it, I would actually probably multiply that out. I would FOIL it. Remember, that's not sine squared minus cosine squared. It has a middle term. So it's this expression times itself. So I'm going to put it underneath it so I can multiply easier. Sine times sine is sine squared. Sine times cosine is minus cosine sine. Cosine times sine is minus cosine sine. And cosine times cosine, they're two negatives, so that's a positive, is cosine squared. I'll draw a line between these. So this will be sine squared minus 2 sine cosine plus cosine squared. Sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. And this happens to be, this part is the double angle formula for sine. So we now match. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get them to match. So we actually do have something else to help us now do these proofs. Let's see, let's do another one. How about, I saw one in the book that I thought would be good to look at because it would actually help you guys talk about tangent too. Let's see, this is number 56. And it says cosine of 2 alpha is equal to 1 minus tangent squared alpha over 1 plus tangent squared alpha. There's a couple ways you can look at these things. I tend to try to do some substitution or use the conjugate. On this one, since it has a 1 plus on the bottom, I would probably try to see if any of my identities that I gave you guys work. Remember, you had Pythagorean identities. So those were some things that you could have used. I think those are in, let's see where those are in the book. I believe they're in 7.1 if you want to go back and look at those. Let's see if I can find them. I know they're on your little cheat sheet that I gave you. Just trying to see if we can find what page they were on, so you could go back and refer to them. No, I can't find them right now. So you need to make sure that you have your sheet out. You can also, you can derive those if you need them. So, for instance, let's do another slide and go back to it for a minute. So, we've just said that 1 plus tangent squared is equal to secant squared. So now we have that. That looks a little bit better. And we could probably make some substitutions here. So, tangent squared is equal to sine squared. Oops, I put theta instead of alpha over cosine squared. And secant is equal to 1 over cosine squared. So I keep wanting to do that. So on the top, if you had a common denominator of cosine squared, since that doesn't have cosine squared underneath it, it would be cosine squared over cosine squared. And then the sine squared already has a cosine squared under it. And it is being divided by 1 over cosine squared. Let's see, let's go ahead and do another slide here. We're trying to get it equal to the double angle for cosine, and that's what we've... So cosine squared alpha over cosine squared alpha minus... This is what we have on that side. Since now we have a common denominator, we have cosine squared alpha minus sine squared alpha over cosine squared alpha times cosine, because this is division, so we flip the 1 on the right or the 1 on the bottom, and we can cancel. And if you look at your new identities, cosine squared alpha minus sine squared alpha is your double angle for cosine. So let's go back and look at that a minute, what we're trying to do. This is actually equal to that. So that's what we're doing. So you're going to need to be able to use these interchangeably. I know that you have the cheat sheet, in front of you for all these things, but you need to make sure that you've done enough of these. Do the practice problems and all the supplements that I provide, and check your answers so that you get pretty fast at this. That's what makes it difficult to take a test over this. If you've only watched a video and done just a couple of practice problems, you're not going to be as fast as you need to be able to finish a test. And you can always contact me if you have questions. The one that you do know that's really easy to do is that sine plus cosine squared is equal to 1. So if I were to take either one of these and divide by cosine, and remember, as long as you do everything in the problem, if you divide everything by the same thing, that's legal. So sine over cosine is tangent. Cosine over cosine is 1. And 1 over cosine squared is secant squared. So this is one of your identities here. I could also divide everything by sine and I can get another one. But that means that tangent squared plus 1 is equal to secant squared. So